Now it's time for Inside Ukraine, where we give you all the latest from the Russian conflict. NATO have claimed that the missile that landed in Poland was likely a Ukrainian weapon, despite Vladimir Zelensky asserting that there were Russian traces in the blast. I'm joined now in the studio by political correspondent Danny Armstrong. Danny, talk to me about this missile strike and NATO, because NATO are sort of corroborating the concept that actually it was a Ukrainian missile.
Well, yeah, this week we've seen the fourth and fifth waves of bombing by Russia in Ukraine. The fourth was the largest since the start of the war. That was on Tuesday. That was when the missile landed or exploded in the village of Przewodów in Poland, which is around about 4 miles over the border from Ukraine. Now, initially it was reported that it was a Russian missile. Later inspection and analysis of the fragments of the exploded missile have found that it is probably a S-300 defence missile fired by Ukraine. Now,
but how do they know that, though? Because they've said that they're traces of Russian missile. So how do they know that?
Well, there may be a little bit of confusion. It was built in the 1970s, of course, when everything was together in the Soviet Union. There could be some confusion over that. Let's make no mistake about it. If there wasn't Russia's invasion into Ukraine, this never would have happened.
It's their fault.
Of course, that's without question. The question is whether there was intent for Russia to endanger the safety of a NATO member state, and that has kind of been, it hasn't been proven, for one, and it doesn't look likely because...
well, they don't want it. Could it potentially be, because to me, I look at it, potentially a cover-up, because NATO don't particularly want... nobody wants World War III. Poland don't want World War III. We all want to believe that that would have been an accident, but irrespective of whether it is, I remember them very clearly saying that if any of those missiles set any foot on any part of NATO's soil, that there will be consequences. There should be consequences.
That's very true. Now, NATO have always been very aware of those red lines for Russia. The red lines, one of the main reasons why there was an invasion is because NATO couldn't confirm that Ukraine or Georgia wouldn't join the alliance. Now, this, of course, would be a huge red line if it was an intended attack on a NATO member state. The reason why I don't think it is because it was Article 5 that would be invoked, which means that if there is an attack on a NATO member state, the NATO members can retaliate. Now, that would have triggered World War III, whereas there is the Article 4, which means there would be a diplomatic solution.
Would it have triggered World War III, or would it have stopped Vladimir Putin in his tracks? Because I think the narrative is that, oh, it'll trigger World War III, I don't think that Vladimir Putin has the gall to do that. I think that if an element of Russian soil was damaged as a response to this, I think he would have to think twice about what he's doing, because he was warned.
Yes, and that's entirely true, and I entirely agree, because I've said many times on this programme, Nana, that the threat of nuclear war benefits Vladimir Putin especially, and everybody involved, anybody who has nuclear warheads, than actual nuclear war. Now, Article 4, which could have been invoked and which Poland was ready to invoke, would have seen just a diplomatic solution. It would have been a concern for the security of a NATO member state, and we could have had just a sit down and a talk about it, but there was nothing of that.
We could have seriously said, look, you need to back off now after that, get out of there, otherwise we're coming for you. If we'd said something, you know, back out of Ukraine, we want you out within this time. If you're not there, then we will start working on some bits of your own country.
Well, that's true, but we means NATO, and NATO, of course, as we know, they talk tough, but they talk tough, but they never come through.
Is there any point then to NATO, if we look at it, when it actually comes down to it? When it comes down to the wire, there's an issue. One of the NATO members did actually, 2 people died in Poland as a result of Vladimir Putin's assault on Ukraine, irrespective of whether it was a shell from a Russian or Ukrainian weapon. The fact is that it would never have happened had he not had that huge barrage bombardment on Ukraine, surely. No,
that is very true. However, if we come back to the Article 5, the only time that it's ever been invoked in the history of it having been, part of NATO's constitution is after 9/11. Now, of course, 2 Polish citizens dying in a village, of course, it's tragic, but it's never going to invoke Article 5, and it wouldn't have triggered World War III. Now, whether there's a point to NATO or not, that's another question.